He was one of the most famous and infamous kings in English history, a monarch once called the Defender of the Faith. Yet he was the very man who ended England's centuries-old bond with the Roman Church. A man so enamored with a woman that he dared to challenge the Pope himself, only to turn his back on her coldly when she failed to bear him a son. His name was Henry VIII. And the story of his 6 wives is not merely one of personal tragedy, it is a revolution of religion, power, and national identity. From the fateful marriage to Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess of European royal blood, to the calculating love affair with Anne Boleyn, the woman who made an entire kingdom change its faith. From the fragile favour shown to Jane Seymour, the mother of his only son, to the heartbreaks of Anne of Cleves, Katherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. Each marriage was a separate chapter in a reign both magnificent and drenched in blood.
He was the Prince of Wales, and much hope and expectation lay on his shoulders.
He is the future of the dynasty.
In this documentary, we will not simply recount the lives of each wife, but also explore a complex psychology. Was Henry VIII a victim of dynastic obsession or the perpetrator of limitless power? Was he a man wounded by women, or was he the one who condemned them to an inescapable historical tragedy? Join us as we step inside the Tudor court, a place where vows, betrayals, and destiny itself could be transformed with a single glance from a king. In 1501, a young girl from Spain set foot in England for a marriage arranged not only by royal families, but by politics, religion, and the destiny of Europe itself. Catherine of Aragon, Princess of Castile, the daughter of Ferdinand II and Isabella I. The monarchs, hailed as the greatest Catholic sovereigns of Europe, left her homeland to become the wife of Arthur, Prince of Wales and heir to the English throne. The marriage between Catherine and Arthur was not merely a marriage contract, it was a strategic alliance between 2 rising powers, England and Spain. By the time Catherine turned 15, she had been raised to be a queen taught languages, religion, philosophy, history, and the ways of a royal court. Yet all this preparation seemed to lose its meaning after only 5 months of marriage. When Arthur died suddenly, perhaps from tuberculosis or an unidentified fever, the people of the time called sweating sickness.
The first statement, actually, they were the most. So she decided her daughters weren't going to have this problem because she wanted them to be ambassadresses of the lineage in other European courts.
At 16, Catherine became a widow and entered a chapter of life shrouded in uncertainty. For nearly 7 years afterward, she remained in England, suspended between power and vulnerability, no longer the wife of the Prince of Wales, yet unable to return to Spain. She was drawn into the whirlpool of politics between 2 courts, like a forgotten pawn on the chessboard of national ambitions. Finances became a pressing issue. The dowry remained unpaid in full. The English hesitated to keep her, while Spain did not wish to take back a princess now regarded as unlucky. However, by 1509, everything changed. King Henry VII passed away, and the second son, Arthur's younger brother, ascended the throne, Henry VIII. Then only 17, young, ambitious, and eager to prove himself, Henry made a controversial decision to marry his brother's widow. According to church law, such a union was forbidden if the previous marriage had been consummated. However, Catherine solemnly declared that she and Arthur had never been intimate. and Pope Julius II issued a special dispensation allowing the marriage to proceed. Henry VIII and Catherine were formally wed, and Catherine became Queen of England, the first of Henry's 6 wives, and the one who would hold the title of Queen the longest. In the beginning, theirs was a marriage of affection and respect. Henry was a vibrant young king, curious and passionate about the arts. Catherine was a wise, virtuous wife, full of strength. Together, they ruled, attended ceremonies, and nurtured the dream of a powerful dynasty that would secure the Tudor legacy. But that dream began to crack when the question of succession grew urgent. Over more than 2 decades, Catherine became pregnant many times, at least 6, but most ended in miscarriage or the loss of the child soon after birth. Only one child survived into adulthood, Princess Mary. Yet for Henry, a man taught that the crown must pass to a male heir. A daughter was not enough. Henry needed a son, a living emblem of Tudor strength and a guarantee for the throne's future. As Catherine reached her 40s, Henry began to doubt. He recalled the words of the Bible, Leviticus 20:21. If a man marries his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. They will be childless. Were these painful losses God's punishment? Had his marriage to Catherine been a sacred mistake from the very start? And then, like a gust of wind fanning the embers of his doubts, a new woman entered the court. Anne Boleyn, with her charm, sharp wit, and rare self-possession, was unlike any woman Henry had ever encountered. It began with glances at court dances, a few measured exchanges, but Anne was in no hurry. She refused to be merely a mistress. She wanted something more brave, and for Henry, a king unaccustomed to denial, that was intoxicating enough to make him willing to break every rule of religion, tradition, and royal propriety. It was then that his marriage to Catherine began to collapse, and England itself began to enter an entirely new era. She was the woman who conquered a king's heart, but to ascend the throne, she had to depose a queen, and in the end, she would pay for it with her own head. How did The name Anne Boleyn is forever tied to one of the greatest religious and political crises in English history, the break with the Roman Catholic Church and the birth of the Church of England. But to understand Anne's influence, we must return to the beginning, to the moment when a woman dared to say no to a king. Anne Boleyn was not the first woman to capture Henry VIII's attention. Before her,
Good Christian people, I have come here to die according to the law and thus yield myself to the will of the king. Your Majesty,
her sister, Mary Boleyn, had been the king's mistress. But Anne was different. She refused to be a plaything in the royal harem. Unmoved by gifts, titles, or honeyed promises, the only thing she desired was the crown itself. Anne was born around 1501 into a family of the upwardly mobile nobility. Her father, Thomas Boleyn, had served as ambassador to France, and during her years at the French court, Anne was educated in a refined, sharp, modern style that made her irresistibly captivating. When she returned to England, she stood out not just for her beauty, but for her intelligence and her knowledge of religion, poetry, music, and debate, qualities rarely found in women of her era. So when Henry VIII encountered Anne around 1525, he could not take his eyes off her. But Anne refused to become his lover, and that only deepened Henry's obsession. She made her position clear. She would be queen or nothing at all. Thus began the most relentless pursuit of Henry VIII's life. He wrote Anne a series of passionate love letters, some containing lines such as, "Since I have been in love with you, my heart has never been my own." Entry 4. These letters, which still survive today, reveal a Henry consumed with desire, jealousy, and a willingness to tear down an entire dynasty to possess this woman. But love for Anne also meant war with Catherine, and more broadly, war with the Pope himself. Henry began petitioning the Roman Curia to annul his marriage to Catherine on the grounds that their union had been unlawful and contrary to Scripture, Leviticus 20:21. Yet Pope Clement VII refused, in part because he was under pressure from Emperor Charles V, Catherine's nephew, after Charles had occupied Rome in 1527. When the Vatican would not relent, Henry responded with an unprecedented move, severing England from the Catholic Church and declaring himself the head of the Church of England. This was a turning point not only in Henry's life, but in the history of all Europe. A religious reformation began, not because of theological convictions, but because of the love or the obsession of one man for one woman. In 1533, Anne Boleyn finally became queen after Henry declared his marriage to Catherine null and void. But the triumph was short-lived. That same year, Anne gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, who would one day become one of England's greatest monarchs. But for Henry, this was a bitter disappointment. He had believed Anne was divinely chosen to bear him a son, and the birth of a daughter made him question everything. Subsequent pregnancies ended in tragedy. Anne miscarried repeatedly, including in 1536 when she lost a male child after falling into panic over rumors that Henry had been injured in a jousting accident. As love faded, Anne's enemies at court began to act. Encouraged by Thomas Cromwell, Henry's new chief minister, a formal investigation was launched. Anne was accused of adultery, incest, and treason charges that, whether or not they were true, were enough to condemn her to death. Despite the flimsy evidence, Anne was imprisoned in the Tower of London, and on May 19, she was beheaded, becoming the first queen in English history to be executed. Just 11 days later, Henry married Jane Seymour. She came like a gentle breeze, not to challenge power, not to change religion, but to give the king what he desired most, a son and pause. Jane Seymour was Henry VIII's third wife, but she was the only woman he chose to rest beside for eternity. Not because she lived long, nor because theirs was a fiery love, but because she was the only one who bore Henry a prince, a symbol he had pursued through nearly 3 decades on the throne. Jane was born around 1508, the daughter of an old noble family from Wiltshire. She did not possess Anne Boleyn's sharp wit, nor Catherine of Aragon's royal lineage. Jane was modest, soft-spoken, and reserved, but she had a gentle, devout, and discreet nature qualities that made her uniquely appealing to a king exhausted by years of turmoil in his household. Jane had served as lady-in-waiting to both Catherine and Anne, so she knew well the intrigues of the court and the danger of attracting the king's favor. When Henry began to court her, she kept her distance carefully, neither refusing outright nor yielding quickly. Jane returned expensive gifts and declined to receive letters without a third person present. That firmness only deepened Henry's fascination, and this time, after disappointment and guilt over Anne Boleyn, he yearned for a marriage that would feel proper. just 11 days after Anne's execution. Henry and Jane were secretly married on 30 May 1536 at Whitehall Palace. There were no lavish feasts, no grand procession. Everything was quiet, like Jane herself. But for Henry, it was a new beginning, a gentler chapter after years of darkness. From the earliest days of her queenship, Jane kept her distance from politics. She did not involve herself in religious disputes or demand influence. Instead, she focused on charity, supporting the church, and especially on trying to reconcile Henry with Princess Mary, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, who had been cast aside after the divorce. In early 1537, Jane became pregnant, and the entire nation seemed to hold its breath. Henry, by then 46, pinned all his hopes on this pregnancy. When Jane gave birth on the 12th of October 1537, the palace erupted in celebration. Bells rang out, cannon fired, and festivals began. The child was a boy named Edward, who would become Edward VI, the first legitimate male heir of the Tudor dynasty that Henry had so longed for all his life. Henry wept with joy. For a brief moment, he praised Jane as the perfect wife. But that happiness did not last long. Only 12 days later, on the 24th of October, Jane Seymour died from complications of childbirth, most likely puerperal fever, a common and deadly affliction of the time. She passed away quietly, as she had always lived. Henry, who often appeared cold in the face of death, fell into profound grief. No one could say for certain how much he truly loved Jane, but one thing was undeniable. She was the only wife never to fall from favor, never to be rejected, never to be executed, and forever remembered as the mother of the future king. Years later, when Henry died in 1547, he was buried at St. Leaf, George's Chapel, in Windsor Castle, right beside Jane. She was the only one who would remain by his side forever. She did not provoke a political storm like Anne Boleyn, nor wage a religious war like Catherine. Jane Seymour left behind only one thing, but it was the one thing Henry had desired more than anything else in the world, a son. And for Henry, that alone was enough to make her the ideal wife. After Jane Seymour's death, Henry VIII entered a period of mourning, but it did not last long. For alongside his sorrow, the problem of succession was still not fully resolved. Though Prince Edward had been born, the child was still very young, and England needed a new queen not only to produce additional heirs, but also to strengthen political alliances in an age of religious upheaval. In 1539, Europe was tense. After England's break with the Catholic Church, Henry sought a strong Protestant alliance to counter the pressure from both France and the Holy Roman Empire. The king decided to marry Anne of Cleves, the sister of John III, Duke of Cleves, a territory in Germany that had embraced the Reformation. It was a political marriage, straightforward and timely. The problem was that Henry had never met Anne. The entire negotiation was carried out through ambassadors and a portrait. The celebrated painter Hans Holbein the Younger, renowned for his exquisitely detailed royal portraits, was tasked with painting Anne's likeness. When the painting reached Henry, he was satisfied. Anne appeared kindly, tall, with a noble bearing, everything a queen should be. But when Anne actually arrived in England, everything collapsed with a single glance. Henry, impulsive and obsessed with appearance, had set his expectations far too high. Anne spoke no English, dressed in old-fashioned German styles, and what Henry could not accept lacked any instant charm or allure. He called Anne a Flanders mare, an insulting comparison to a coarse-looking horse. After their first meeting at Rochester, the king quietly withdrew, whispering to a courtier, "I like her a little." Nonetheless, the wedding took place on the 6th of January 1540, though Henry walked reluctantly to the altar. On the wedding night, he openly declared he could not consummate the marriage, and within days, he began looking for a way to end it. Meanwhile, Anne had no idea what was happening. She was not treated harshly, but she was kept at a distance, untouched, and soon realized Henry did not love her. Not at all. Barely 6 months later, Henry presented his case for annulment. Anne had never fulfilled her role as a wife. She agreed without protest, no lawsuits, nor resistance. In return, Henry granted her a remarkable settlement: castles, estates, a generous annual income, and the honorary title, the king's beloved sister. Noi. For the rest of her life, Anne lived as an independent, wealthy lady, free from the intrigues of court, and watched as 4 more of Henry's wives were divorced, executed, or died in childbirth. In a reign drenched with blood and tears, Anne of Cleves survived with quiet intelligence, not through beauty or power, but by knowing when to withdraw with dignity. Many modern historians consider Anne the wisest of Henry's wives. She never tried to win his heart, nor did she lose her head like those who came before her. She lived until 1557, passing away peacefully, and was buried in Westminster Abbey. An honor few received without truly being queen. To Henry, Anne of Cleves was never a love, but perhaps she was the only wife he never truly disliked. In 1540, just weeks after finalizing the annulment of his marriage to Anne of Cleves, Henry VIII, by then 49 years old, in failing health, heavyset, and prone to fits of melancholy, entered yet another marriage. This time, the bride was a beautiful young woman of just 17, Katherine Howard, a relative of his executed wife, Anne Boleyn.
I come to tell you that for your offences against the and return to His Majesty.
Please, Sir Thomas. Everything in here is so... Where is the king?
Catherine was the niece of the Duke of Norfolk and had been raised in the household of the Dowager Duchess Agnes Tilney, where she lived in an environment of lax supervision among young noble girls and boys. According to records, the bedchamber doors were often left unlocked at night. In this setting, Catherine had early romantic entanglements, particularly with Henry Manox and Francis Derriham's secret affairs that would later seal her tragic fate. When she entered the household as a lady-in-waiting to Anne of Cleves, Catherine quickly caught the king's eye. To Henry, disillusioned by Anne, suffering from ulcerated legs, and haunted by his advancing age, Catherine was like a fresh breeze. She was young, lively, fond of music and dance, and full of vitality, qualities long absent from the Tudor court. Before long, Henry called her "my rose without a thorn." and resolved to marry her that very summer. On the 28th of July 1540, their wedding took place at Hampton Court, the same day that Thomas Cromwell, the King's powerful chief minister, was executed for his failures in arranging the Cleves marriage. Katherine Howard was officially crowned Queen of England at the age of 17. But what Catherine did not understand, or perhaps chose to ignore, was that the Tudor court was no place for Narva hearts. In that world, the past never truly slept, and in a palace crowded with watchful eyes, secrets never remained secret for long. Just over a year into the marriage, rumours began to swirl that Catherine was still in contact with Francis Dereham, who had once called her his pre-contracted wife during their time in the Dowager Duchess's household. Worse still, witnesses began recounting details of their nights together. The gossip reached Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury, and he wasted no time bringing the matter to the king. At first, Henry refused to believe it. He was devastated with grief, unable to accept that the girl he loved and trusted completely had betrayed him. But soon, the evidence mounted: letters, confessions, and finally, a crushing accusation that Catherine was carrying on an illicit affair with a young courtier, Thomas Culpeper. Even as she served as queen, both Dereham and Culpeper were arrested, tortured, and executed in horrific fashion, hanged, drawn, and quartered as a warning to any who might dare offend the king's honour. Catherine herself was imprisoned in the Tower of London, the same place her cousin Anne Boleyn had once been held, another queen. Once adored by Henry, and ultimately beheaded, on the 13th of February 1542, Katherine Howard was executed, not yet 20 years old. According to legend, the night before her death, Catherine requested that the execution block be brought into her cell so she could practice laying her head upon it, a detail that may be apocryphal but captures the unspeakable pathos of a young woman thrust into the court like a pawn, taught neither how to live nor how to survive. The words famously attributed to Catherine before she died:
"It's my duty to escort you to the tower."
I have come here to die.
Light is very beautiful.
In Henry VIII's reign of ambition and betrayal, Katherine Howard became a symbol of youth consumed too quickly, of reckless innocence paid for in blood, and of a blossom that bloomed too early in a dark world of power, only to be crushed before it could release its fragrance. When Henry VIII married his sixth wife Catherine Parr on the 12th of July 1543, England had changed, and the king himself was no longer the vigorous young man he had once been. He was nearly 52 years old, afflicted with a necrotic leg, increasingly violent in temper, and haunted by the fear of betrayal after 5 failed marriages, 2 of which had ended with wives on the scaffold by his own order. Catherine Parr, in stark contrast to his previous wives, was neither young nor seductively beautiful, nor driven by reckless ambition. She was an intelligent widow, twice married and twice bereaved, introspective, fond of books, and inclined toward reflection on religion and philosophy. Born in 1512, Catherine was the daughter of Sir Thomas Parr, a nobleman of the Westmoreland gentry. She received an exceptional education, fluent in Latin, French, and Italian, and cultivated a rare passion for writing. She would become the first woman in English history to publish a book under her own name. But Catherine was more than an educated woman. She was perceptive. She understood how the Tudor court worked, and she was wise enough not to fall into the traps that had ensnared her predecessors. When she accepted Henry's proposal, even though she still loved another man, Thomas Seymour, the brother of Jane Seymour, she chose to sacrifice her private happiness for survival in a treacherous court. From the earliest days as queen, Catherine Parr showed tact and composure. She cared for the king almost like a nurse, gently soothing his physical pain and turbulent mind, while using her learning and kindness to maintain a modest influence, never threatening, never subservient. She was also the person who reunited Henry with his 3 children: Mary, daughter of Catherine of Aragon; Elizabeth, daughter of Anne Boleyn; and Edward, son of Jane Seymour. Thanks to Catherine's efforts, Henry signed legislation restoring both daughters to legitimacy and succession rights, a decision that would shape England's future. As Elizabeth would one day become the great Queen Elizabeth I, however, it was Catherine's role in the religious reform that truly set her apart. She held reformist sympathies, leaning toward Protestant ideas, and often organized theological discussions within the royal household. In 1545, she published Prayers or Meditations, a deeply personal work of devotion infused with the spirit of reform, but expressed in a conciliatory tone. That involvement nearly cost her life. A group of conservative clerics at court, led by Stephen Gardiner, conspired to ensnare her with accusations of heresy. An arrest warrant was prepared. Henry, at first furious, later changed his mind. Catherine hurried to the king, knelt before him, and declared herself merely a weak woman, learning only to please your majesty. Henry, satisfied by her submission, tore up the warrant in front of her eyes. It was a life or death performance, and Catherine had prevailed not through power or beauty, but through deep understanding of people and timing. In 1547, Henry VIII died at age 55, leaving a kingdom divided between Catholic tradition and Protestant reform, and a 9-year-old boy, Edward VI, to inherit the throne. Catherine was finally free. She quickly married Thomas Seymour, the man she had long loved, but their happiness was short-lived. In 1548, Catherine died after giving birth to her first daughter, less than a year into her long-awaited marriage to the man of her heart. Catherine Parr was the last survivor of Henry VIII's 6 wives. But she did more than merely survive. She left a profound legacy in English history. As the healer who reconciled Henry with his children and opened the path for the Reformation to flourish, she was a woman of clarity in an age of chaos. A testament to the truth that courage does not always announce itself with sword and battle cry, but sometimes with patience and a mind far ahead of its time. Henry VIII has been dead for more than 4 centuries, yet his legacy remains etched into the history of England, not only through statutes, wars, and the creation of a new church, but also through the tragedies of the 6 women who entered his life. Each wife was her own chapter. Catherine of Aragon, with her steadfastness and sorrow, Anne Boleyn. With her ambition and tragedy, Jane Seymour. With her gentleness and sacrifice, Anne of Cleves. With her wise withdrawal, Katherine Howard. With her reckless youth, and Catherine Parr. With her intellect and quiet endurance. They loved, they dreamed, they feared, they sacrificed, and at times, They paid with their lives. Yet it is precisely these fates, both noble and fragile, that have shaped the immortal story of a dynasty at once splendid and cruel. Of a king who wielded immense power, but never truly found peace. And of the women who determined the destiny of an empire. And perhaps, this is the most profound reminder of all, that beyond every throne, every ambition, and every claim to power, what remains are human hearts with all their longing to be loved and their fear of being forgotten.